The plains of northern Texas were never kind when the storm winds came. That evening, the horizon burned with violet lightning, and the air felt thick enough to choke on. The rain fell like gravel, hard, stinging, relentless. The cattle had already been driven into shelter, and the land was silent except for the howl of the wind that seemed to echo from the bones of the earth itself. Elias Kane, a tall, broad-shouldered rancher with gray in his beard and calloused hands, worked by lantern light in the barn, nailing shut the last of the stall doors. He'd lived alone for 5 years since his wife, Clara, died of fever, and the silence of his ranch had become both his punishment and his peace. The storm didn't bother him much. He'd seen worse. What unsettled him was the strange, electric feeling that rode in the air that night, the kind that made horses restless and dogs whine. As the thunder cracked overhead, Elias was about to head back to his cabin when he heard something faint, a thud against the barn door. At first he thought it was the wind tossing a branch, but then it came again, softer this time, followed by a sound that froze him in place. A weak, trembling voice, whispering, "Help." He grabbed his lantern, pushed open the door, and the rain immediately drenched him to the bone. The flame inside the lantern flickered, throwing light across the muddy ground, and that's when he saw her. A young woman lay crumpled by the threshold, her hair plastered to her face, her dress torn and soaked through with mud and blood. Her bare feet were cut and swollen from walking. Elias knelt beside her, his voice rough but gentle. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, wide and glassy, the color of pale green glass. For a heartbeat, she looked terrified, not of the storm, but of him. Her lips trembled, and when she tried to speak, her voice cracked like brittle wood. "Please, don't send me back." Elias didn't ask where back was. He just lifted her in his arms, and she was light, far too light, and carried her inside the barn away from the rain. He set her down near the haystack where it was warmest and covered her with an old blanket. The lantern light revealed the cuts on her arms and face and something else. A strip of cloth wrapped tightly around her left arm, darkened with old blood. "Stay still," he said, reaching for a water jug. "You're safe now. I'll get the doc from town first thing in the morning." But the moment his hand moved toward the cloth, she recoiled violently, clutching her arm to her chest as if protecting something sacred or cursed. Her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered through chattering teeth, "Don't touch it. Please, I'm not clean anymore." The words struck Elias like a hammer. "Not clean?" What did she mean? Her voice wasn't just afraid, it carried shame, despair, something broken beyond reason. He didn't press her. He simply nodded and sat nearby, watching her shiver under the blanket. The storm raged on, hammering against the roof. But inside the barn, a strange quiet settled, the kind that feels like the air is holding its breath. As the night deepened, Elias noticed her eyes darting toward the door every few minutes, as though expecting someone or something to appear. Her lips kept moving, silently repeating words he couldn't hear. Elias leaned back, uneasy. He'd taken in strays before, lost travelers, injured drifters, but never anyone who looked this haunted. He had the sudden chilling thought that the storm hadn't driven her here by chance. It had brought her, and outside, beneath the thunder, something else seemed to move in the darkness, something that knew her name. Morning broke over the ranch in a haze of mist and gold, but the air was heavy, thick with the smell of wet earth and wood smoke. Elias Kane hadn't slept a wink. He'd spent the night in his chair beside the barn door, keeping the lantern lit, his shotgun propped against his knee. Every time he closed his eyes, he swore he could hear faint whispers in the rain. Not words, but sounds that didn't belong to wind or storm. Inside, Mara. That was the name she had finally whispered before drifting into uneasy sleep, lay motionless beneath the blanket. The fire in the hearth had long gone out, and she looked even paler in the morning light. Elias brought in a cup of hot coffee and a slice of cornbread, setting them beside her gently. When she stirred awake, her first reaction wasn't confusion, but fear. Her eyes darted around the barn, wild and alert. For a brief second she seemed ready to bolt, until she saw Elias sitting quietly nearby, his hat in his hands, offering no threat. "Morning," he said softly. "You're safe." "Storm's past." Mara blinked at him, her lips trembling. "Safe?" she repeated, as if testing the word. "You don't understand. Safe doesn't exist anymore." Elias frowned but didn't press her. He'd learned long ago that some truths had to be spoken in their own time. He just nodded and handed her the coffee. Her hands shook as she took it, the mug clinking against her teeth when she tried to drink. When he offered to clean the cuts on her face, she didn't resist, but the moment he mentioned her arm, she went rigid again. That strip of cloth, once white, was now a muddy brown, wrapped tightly from her wrist to her elbow. Dried blood had seeped through the fibers, but she still wouldn't let him near it. "Let me help with that," he said, his voice firm but kind. "You'll get an infection if—" "No!" she cried, pulling her arm away so suddenly that the coffee spilled across the straw floor. Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't touch it!" "You can't." Elias froze. He wasn't easily rattled. He'd broken wild horses, fought off rustlers, buried his wife with his own hands. But something about the way Mara said "you can't" made his stomach twist. It wasn't just fear. It was terror of something she believed was real. He lowered his voice. "All right, I won't." She pressed her hand against the wrapped arm, breathing hard. "It's not just a wound," she said quietly. "They did something to me." "They made me carry it? Who?" Elias asked. She shook her head violently. "You don't want to know. If they find me here, they'll kill you too. Please, just let me go before dark." Elias stood, pacing slowly, trying to piece together her words. There were rumors in town of strange men prospecting near the canyon, digging up old ground that was never meant to be touched. Some said they'd found relics, others said bones, but no one mentioned people being branded or carrying something. When he looked at Mara again, she was trembling so hard the blanket slipped from her shoulders. For the first time, he noticed faint bruises along her neck, not the kind left by accident, but by hands. "I'm not sending you out there alone," Elias said finally. "Whatever you're running from, it won't touch you here." She met his gaze then, really looked at him. There was gratitude in her eyes, but also sorrow. "You don't understand, Mr. Kane," she whispered. "It's not them I'm running from anymore." Elias frowned. "Then what?" Her voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "It's what they left inside me." Silence hung heavy in the barn. Outside, a crow called from the fence post, its cry sharp and lonely against the empty sky. Elias felt a chill run down his spine, though the air was warm. He wanted to ask her what she meant, what they'd done to her, but the words caught in his throat. Something told him that whatever lay beneath that cloth wasn't just a wound. It was a warning. And as the day went on, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that the ranch wasn't as quiet as it should have been. Something was moving out there, watching. The next morning dawned clear, but there was no peace in the light. The storm had left behind a silence that felt wrong, too heavy, too still. Even the usual sounds of the ranch were missing. No horses stamping in the stalls, no lowing of cattle, not even the lazy chirp of crickets that normally filled the dawn air. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. Elias Kane saddled his horse before sunrise, glancing back toward the barn where Mara still slept. She had refused to enter the main house, saying the walls made her feel trapped. Elias didn't argue. Something about her unease was contagious. Even he didn't like staying inside for long anymore. The girl's words, "It's what they left inside me," had echoed in his head all night. Refusing to fade, he needed answers. So after leaving Mara some food and fresh water, he rode into Dry Creek, the nearest town. The dirt roads were slick from last night's rain, and the few early risers he passed looked as worn and wary as he felt. At the general store, Elias tied up his horse and overheard two men talking by the porch, their voices hushed but urgent. "Whole damn camp gone," one said, his face pale under his hat. "Miners, diggers, even the surveyor." Sheriff found the place empty. "Like they packed up in the middle of supper." The other man spat into the mud. "Didn't pack up. Didn't leave. The doc said the ones they did find were Wrong. Skin burned with some kind of mark. Looked like lightning hit him straight from hell. Elias stopped cold. His mind immediately went to Mara, to the cloth she kept wrapped around her arm, to her trembling voice when she said she wasn't clean. He turned toward the men. "You talking about the crew up near Red Hollow Canyon?" The first man nodded. "Yeah, you know 'em?" "Just heard stories," Elias said, keeping his tone neutral. "What were they digging for?" The second man shrugged. "Gold, they thought. But the foreman told the preacher they hit rock that glowed. Some kind of old stone chamber under the canyon wall. Said it hummed like it was alive. Then next day, half the crew went missing. Preacher said they woke something," the first added grimly. "Said the land remembers things we ain't meant to see." Elias said nothing more. He bought some supplies, tipped his hat, and rode out fast, his heart pounding. When he returned to the ranch, the sky was a dull gray again, the color of ash. Mara was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the horizon. Her hair, still damp from washing, clung to her face. "You went to town," she said quietly, without turning around. "I did," Elias replied. "Heard about the mining camp." She closed her eyes as if bracing for what came next. "They shouldn't have dug there," she whispered. "They found what was meant to stay buried." Elias dismounted, stepping closer. "And you were with them?" Mara nodded slowly. "I was a cook for the camp. Just a job, a few dollars a week. But when they found that thing in the canyon, the air changed. Men started fighting for no reason. Some heard voices. One night, the foreman made us all go down and touch the stone. Said it was part of some ritual to claim the land. When I refused, they held me down. Her hand went to the cloth around her arm. That's when it burned me. I don't remember anything after that. Just the light and the sound of screaming." Elias's gut twisted. "The sheriff says the camp's gone. No one left but you." Mara looked up at him then, her eyes glinting like glass in the dying sun. "That's because it followed me," she said. "It marked me, Mr. Kane, and it's coming here next." A chill swept through Elias despite the warmth of the afternoon. In the distance, a lone hawk circled above the canyon line. For the first time since his wife's death, Elias felt real fear. Not for himself, but for what was already on his land, and as the wind shifted, carrying the faintest sound of whispering from the canyon's direction, Elias realized the girl wasn't delusional, she was a warning. That night, the wind returned to the plains, not as a storm this time, but as a low, ceaseless moan that seemed to creep across the land. The moon hung pale over the Kane ranch, its light turning the fields into a sea of silver. The cattle refused to settle, pacing nervously at the fences, their eyes glinting white in the dark. Even the old barn creaked as though something inside it wanted to move but couldn't. Elias Kane sat awake at his kitchen table, the lantern burning low beside him. The girl's words haunted him. "It followed me. It marked me. It's coming here next." He'd tried to make sense of it, but reason kept slipping away like water through his fingers. The stories from town, the missing miners, the strange symbol, everything pointed to something he didn't understand. And yet he could feel it in his bones. Whatever was happening to Mara wasn't just madness. He rose from the table and went to the barn. The door groaned open, and the smell of hay and damp wood filled his lungs. Mara was asleep on a cot near the far wall, curled tightly beneath the blanket, her breathing shallow and uneven. In the faint glow of the lantern, Elias saw her face twitch as if trapped in some nightmare. Sweat glistened on her forehead, and her hand clutched at the arm wrapped in cloth. He hesitated. He'd promised not to touch it. But her pain looked unbearable, and the fever was setting in. The rancher in him, the caretaker, couldn't just stand by. "Mara," he whispered softly. No response. He knelt beside her, his shadow falling across the cot. "I'm sorry, girl," he murmured. "But whatever this is, I can't let it kill you." With careful fingers, Elias began to unwind the filthy cloth. The fabric peeled away in sticky layers, each one darker than the last. A faint metallic scent filled the air, like blood mixed with burned copper. He reached the final layer and stopped breathing. There, seared into her skin, was a brand. A mark unlike anything he'd ever seen. It wasn't just a burn. The edges shimmered faintly as if alive. The symbols spiraled inwards, forming a circle of jagged lines and an eye-like shape at the center. Beneath it, the skin pulsed faintly, glowing for an instant before fading again. Elias felt the blood drain from his face. He'd seen cattle brands, gunshot scars, burns from lightning, but nothing like this. The mark looked carved, not by hand, but by something intelligent and ancient. When he reached out, his fingertips hovering just above it, a sudden chill swept through the barn. The lantern flame flickered violently. Somewhere in the rafters, a horse snorted and kicked. Mara's eyes snapped open. "No!" she screamed, jerking her arm away. The lantern toppled, its light spinning wildly. Elias stumbled back, heart pounding as she sat upright, gasping for air. "Why did you look?" she sobbed. "You weren't supposed to look." Elias tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. What is that thing, Mara?" She held her arm close, trembling. "It's not just a mark," she whispered. "It's a door. They opened it, and it needs a vessel to stay open. It's inside me." Elias stared at her, horrified. "A door to what?" Her voice broke. "To where the light comes from. But it's not light anymore." The lantern flame suddenly went out. The barn was swallowed by darkness. Elias could hear his own heartbeat, and beneath it, something else. A faint whisper like wind through dry grass, but too deliberate. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from Mara's arm. She clutched it tightly, crying softly. "It talks when it knows someone's seen it," she said. "Now it knows you too." Elias backed away, his breath shaking, his palms cold. The whispering grew louder, threading through the dark. For the first time, he realized the girl hadn't brought the curse here. She had been carrying it all along, and now he feared it had found a new name to remember, Elias Kane. The dawn came late to the Kane ranch that morning, or at least it felt that way. The sky glowed an unnatural shade of red before the sun even crested the horizon, staining the land in a color that made Elias's stomach turn. It wasn't the usual warmth of sunrise. It was the shade of rust and blood. He hadn't slept. After the mark revealed itself, Mara had fallen into an uneasy silence, rocking back and forth in her cot as though trying to soothe a crying child that only she could hear. The whispering from the night before had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was worse. It pressed down like a weight, as if the entire ranch were holding its breath. Elias busied himself with the morning chores, feeding the horses, checking the fences, anything to pretend that life was normal. But even the animals seemed to sense the wrongness. The dogs refused to enter the barn, and one of the horses had torn its reins in the night, bolting into the hills. When Elias found it dead near the creek, eyes open, body twisted, no mark of predator or wound, he stopped pretending. He returned to the barn, jaw clenched. Mara sat on the floor now, her knees pulled to her chest, humming a tune that didn't sound human. The mark on her arm glowed faintly through the bandage. "You need to tell me everything," Elias said firmly. "No more riddles, no more half-truths. What did those miners do to you?" Her humming stopped. For a long moment she didn't speak, her eyes staring blankly at the dirt. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began, "They called it the stone that hums. It wasn't gold they were after. The foreman, Bragg, said he'd seen carvings near the canyon ridge, something ancient. He thought it was Indian, but it wasn't. The markings were wrong, too perfect. They built a camp around it, and when they dug deep enough, they found a slab, smooth and warm, like metal, but it pulsed under your hand." She shivered, pulling the blanket tighter. Bragg said it was a door. He said the earth itself was hiding something below it. When they opened it, a light came out, but not sunlight. It was alive. It moved. It wanted to touch us. The others ran. "I should have too." Elias leaned forward. "And the mark?" "They forced me to touch it," she said, tears filling her eyes. "Bragg said it needed a vessel to stay open. The moment my skin touched that stone, it burned me. But the pain didn't stop when I pulled away. It went inward. It's still burning, Mr. Kane. It's been burning since that night." Elias rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of it. A cursed relic, a human vessel. It sounded like madness, and yet the brand, the glowing, the whispers. He had seen them. What happened to Bragg and the others? He asked, her voice broke. They started digging again. They thought they could control it. But the light, it turned on them. It took them apart, not like a beast would. Like it unmade them. By morning, there was nothing left but ash and that sound. That whispering sound that doesn't stop. She looked up then, her eyes wide and bloodshot. That's the sin of the hills, Mr. Kane. The old ones buried it because it wasn't meant for us. And now it's inside me. Elias felt the back of his neck prickle. The wind outside had died completely, and yet the old barn door creaked open on its own. The smell of damp earth and iron rolled in, heavy and suffocating. Mara's breathing quickened. "It knows I told you," she said. "You feel it, don't you? It's awake again." Elias turned toward the open door, shotgun in hand, his eyes scanning the empty fields. Nothing moved, but the shadows seemed deeper, the air thicker, and then he heard it again. That same low hum, distant but clear. Rising from the direction of Red Hollow Canyon, Mara began to cry, rocking harder. "It's calling for me," she whispered. "It wants to go home." Elias didn't know whether to pray or to run. But deep down, he already knew. There was no outrunning something that came from beneath the earth itself. The sin of the hills had found its voice again. That night, the air around the Kane Ranch turned strange, thick and trembling like the calm before a tornado. The wind had died completely. Not even the cicadas dared to sing. The sky was clear, but a dull red glow pulsed faintly along the horizon, right where Red Hollow Canyon lay. Elias had seen many strange things in his years, droughts, floods, and death, but never light that moved like breath. Inside the barn, Mara sat by the dying fire, wrapped in the same blanket, her skin pale and slick with sweat. The mark on her arm shone through the cloth now, steady and bright, like a coal that refused to cool. Elias had covered the windows, doused the lamps, and scattered salt along the threshold, not out of superstition, but because he no longer knew what else to do. Every few minutes, he could hear something from beneath the floorboards, a deep, rhythmic vibration, like the faint heartbeat of the land itself. The first time he'd heard it, he thought it was thunder. Now, he wasn't so sure. Mara's voice came quietly through the dark. "It's spreading." Elias turned to her. "What is?" She looked up, eyes glassy and fevered. "The light. The thing inside me. It wants to leave. It's looking for a way." Elias knelt beside her, pulling the bandage from her arm. The glowing veins had crept further up, twisting like roots, reaching past her shoulder toward her neck. The skin around them shimmered faintly, as though the light were trying to escape. He swallowed hard. "There has to be a way to stop it." Mara smiled weakly, shaking her head. "You can't stop it. The miners woke it, but I'm the one who keeps it here. If I die, it'll find another host. It always does." Elias clenched his jaw. "Then maybe there's a way to force it out." Her laughter was soft, bitter. "You sound like Bragg." Before he could answer, the ground shuddered. The lanterns swung on their hooks. From the well outside came a low, hollow roar, like air rushing through a tunnel. The horses screamed in their stalls. Elias grabbed his shotgun and stepped toward the door. "Stay here," he told her. Mara's eyes widened. "Don't go out there!" But he was already pushing through the barn doors. The night outside glowed faintly, not from fire but from the earth itself. The ground near the old well pulsed, cracks spreading outward like veins of light. Heat rolled up from the dirt, making the air shimmer. He approached slowly, the shotgun steady in his hands. A sound like whispering rose from the fissures, not voices, but something older, too vast for language. Elias could almost feel it inside his head, brushing against his thoughts like icy fingers. Then he heard Mara scream from inside the barn. He ran back, heart hammering. She was on her knees, her hands clutching at her chest, light pouring from the mark on her arm. The ground beneath her glowed in answer. The boards creaked and cracked, splitting open to reveal faint carvings beneath the soil, ancient symbols identical to the one burned into her skin. "It's under us," Elias muttered. The well, it's part of it. Mara's voice was weak. It's not just under us, it is us. The land, the hills, everything. It's all connected. The air grew unbearably hot. Sparks leapt from the fireplace, though no fire burned there. Elias felt the floor tremble again, and from beneath the barn came the faintest echo of that same humming tone, low and constant. Mara clutched his arm. "You have to burn it," she gasped. "The well, the ground, me, all of it. If you don't, it'll spread across the valley." Elias stared at her in horror. "I'm not killing you. You don't understand," she cried. "I'm already gone." Outside, the red glow flared brighter, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. The hum became a roar. Elias could feel it in his chest, the earth breathing, alive and angry. And then the voice came, soft but thunderous inside his skull. She opened the door. "You will keep it open." Elias staggered back, clutching his head. The light burst from Mara's arm in a blinding wave, illuminating the barn like a sunrise from hell. When it faded, she was on the floor, unconscious, and the brand had stopped glowing. For the first time, the humming was gone. But the silence that followed wasn't relief. It was the kind that comes before something much, much worse. Elias looked toward the horizon. Red Hollow Canyon burned with light again, brighter, angrier. The fire beneath the ranch had only just begun. By the time the sun rose again, the Kane Ranch no longer felt like a place that belonged to the living. The air itself had changed, thicker, heavier, humming faintly like the world was holding a secret too large to contain. The light that once glowed from Mara's mark had faded, but Elias knew better than to believe it was over. Nothing that powerful simply vanished. He sat outside the barn, staring toward Red Hollow Canyon. Even from miles away, he could see faint wisps of smoke curling upward from its mouth, twisting against the dawn sky. The night's fire still burned somewhere beneath the earth. Inside, Mara lay motionless on the cot, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Every now and then, her lips moved as though whispering to someone unseen. Elias couldn't hear the words, but he knew they weren't meant for him. He'd thought of riding into town for help, the sheriff, the preacher, maybe even a doctor, but deep down, he knew they couldn't help. This wasn't a wound or an illness. This was something older, something that belonged to the hills and the bones buried beneath them. That's when he remembered Clara's old journal. His late wife had been a woman of quiet faith and deep curiosity. Before her death, she'd spent years studying the stories of the plains. Old tribal myths, forgotten settlements, even Spanish legends from before the frontier days. Elias had never paid much attention, thinking her fascination with old curses was harmless nonsense. But now, those memories came rushing back like fragments of prophecy. He went into the house and dug through her chest. The journal was still there, leather-bound, edges cracked with age. He flipped through until he found it, a sketch of a symbol almost identical to the one branded on Mara's arm. Under it, Clara had written a single phrase: "To cleanse the earth, one must take the burden of the land." Elias read it again and again, his pulse quickening. The entry spoke of ritual transfers, ancient rites where a living being could absorb corruption to seal it away. The stories warned that such a person would not die immediately, but would no longer remain human. He looked toward the barn. He didn't need to think twice. When he entered, Mara stirred weakly. "Mr. Kane," she murmured. "I found a way," he said softly. She blinked, dazed. "No, whatever you think you can do, it'll kill you." Elias knelt beside her. "If I do nothing, it kills us both." "Maybe more." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't understand what it wants. You can't carry it. It's not something you can fight. It's a hunger. It'll hollow you out," he smiled faintly. "Maybe. But at least I'll keep it from hurting anyone else." Before she could protest, he lifted her arm gently, pressing his calloused palm over the brand. The moment his skin touched hers, the world tilted. A rush of heat surged through him, searing his veins. Light exploded behind his eyes, not gold or white, but a deep, molten red that felt alive. He could feel it moving, crawling up his arm like liquid fire. Mara screamed, the sound cutting through the air like glass. But Elias didn't let go. He whispered the words Clara had written in her journal. Half prayer, half plea. The burden of land to flesh, the curse of soil to blood. The light leapt from Mara's arm into his. The brand burned itself onto his chest, glowing through his shirt. The pain was indescribable. Fire and ice, light and shadow all at once. When it finally stopped, he fell to his knees, gasping for breath. Mara lay still. The mark on her arm was gone. Outside, the rumbling ceased. The earth grew still. The air felt clean again. No humming, no whispers, no heat. Elias looked down at his hands. The veins beneath his skin shimmered faintly, red and gold, pulsing with quiet rhythm. He could hear faint whispers, not around him but inside him now. He knew what it meant. He had taken it. When Mara opened her eyes, tears rolled down her cheeks. "What have you done?" she whispered. Elias managed a tired smile. "What I had to." She tried to rise, but he stopped her with a gentle hand. "It's over," he said. "You're clean now." But as the morning light touched his face, she saw it. The faint glow in his eyes, pale and unnatural, reflecting the same crimson hue that once burned beneath her skin. She covered her mouth, trembling. "No, Elias, it's not over. It's awaken you now." He didn't answer. He simply looked toward the canyon, and for the first time, he understood the voice that had haunted Mara. It wasn't just whispering anymore. It was listening. The dawn came gray and thin, a colorless light that crept slowly over the horizon, like the world itself was hesitant to wake. The storm clouds had cleared, but the sky was heavy, a hollow silence pressing against the earth. No bird sang, no wind stirred the tall grass. The Kane Ranch stood utterly still, like a painting of a place the world had forgotten. Elias Kane opened his eyes to the dim light seeping through the cracks of the barn. His breath came slow and heavy. Every part of his body ached, as if he'd been buried under the weight of the earth itself. He remembered the light, the fire, the unbearable pain of it carving through his skin. And then nothing. Now the world felt strange, sharper, quieter. He could hear the creak of the barn wood, the slow dripping of water from the rafters, the thrum of something beneath the ground that pulsed in time with his own heartbeat. When he looked down at his chest, he saw it. The mark. The same symbol that had burned on Mara's arm now glowed faintly beneath his skin, etched into him like molten gold turned cold. The skin around it shimmered when he breathed. It didn't hurt. It just was. A few feet away, Mara stirred. She blinked, disoriented, then sat up quickly when she saw him. "Elias?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He turned to her slowly. For a moment, she saw the man she knew, tired, weathered, kind. But then his eyes met hers, and her breath caught. They were pale, almost colorless, glowing faintly with the same light that once lived in her. "It's gone from you," he said softly. His voice was calm, but there was a strange resonance beneath it, like two voices speaking in unison. "You're free now." Mara shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "No, you're not. You shouldn't have taken it, Elias. It wasn't meant for a man to carry." He smiled faintly, the expression weary but peaceful. "Maybe not, but someone had to." Outside, the first rays of sunlight broke across the land, pale and distant. The fields shimmered in the cold light, and for a moment, everything seemed still. Yet Elias could feel it, a soft hum beneath his feet, alive and restless. The earth itself seemed to breathe with him now. Mara stood, clutching her blanket tightly. "We can still fix this," she said desperately. "There has to be a way to send it back, to seal it." Elias shook his head. "It's sealed." "I can feel it. It's quiet now." He looked down at his hands. The veins beneath his skin pulsed faintly, like roots carrying light instead of blood. "But it's not gone." "Not really. It's sleeping." "In me." She took a hesitant step toward him. "Then we have to stop?" He looked up, his expression unreadable. "No, you don't understand. It's not evil, Mara. It's ancient. It's part of this land. It was never meant to be locked away, only understood. We just woke it too soon." Mara froze, her voice breaking. You sound like them. Like the miners. Elias's smile faded. No, they wanted power. I just want peace. He walked past her, stepping into the open air. The morning light touched his skin, and the symbol on his chest flared faintly, not burning, but glowing like sunlight through thin water. The ground beneath him seemed to breathe, faint ripples of light moving outward through the soil before fading into the distance. Mara followed, tears streaking her face. Elias, please, she begged. You can't stay here. It'll eat you alive. He turned to her one last time. The man she had met, the quiet rancher, the lonely widower, was still there, but behind his eyes something vast now stirred. Something older than words watching through him. It already has, he said softly. But it's clean now. Then he turned toward the canyon. A faint wind picked up, carrying with it a whisper that wasn't quite sound, like the breath of the earth itself sighing in relief. Mara stood in the doorway, clutching the blanket as he walked into the distance. The light followed him, a pale shimmer across the grass that faded as the sun rose higher. When she could no longer see him, she whispered his name, but the only answer was silence. Only when the day fully broke did she realize what had changed. The hum was gone. The air was still. The land was quiet again. The curse was gone from the world. But in the far distance, beneath the pale light of morning, a figure stood at the edge of Red Hollow Canyon. Still, silent, watching the earth breathe, Elias Kane, and his eyes were glowing like dawn.